put together. But although the language is what it says, it's not like I don't have the experience. It just doesn't fall within the time that is outlined in 624.260. Review of the practice scores that I've been taking at the Contractors Exam Center shows that I would be qualified to pass the test right now. Even it's an open book test and I could pass it. I have all high scores on the business law and the trades. My only downfall is I can't show 4 years within the next 15. So with that, I thank you for your time and your consideration. Let me speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others here today for public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to quickly share my appreciation to Register of Vote and his staff for working alongside of us in recent weeks to prepare our agenda and material for today's meeting. It's always a pleasure to hold these discussions and learn from each other. So thank you again to California to be with us today.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Chair Teichert, turn it over to you for public comment.
Thank you, Chair Martin, for introducing item B, public comment. The same rules Nevada just recited regarding public comment apply in California with respect to the importance of public comment, the limitation to 3 minutes apiece, prohibition of discussion of items not on the agenda, and the request not to discuss disciplinary items. Because California is hosting this meeting in part as a remote meeting and is calling for remote California public commenters today as technology permits, you will notice throughout this meeting that Nevada will call for public comment for any members in the public in this room today. And then I will be calling for additional public comment as appropriate for remote viewers in California. California public comment also extends to any commenters who seek to request agenda items for future meetings. If your comments don't involve an item on today's agenda, this would be the time where you can make them. If you have comments on one of our agenda items, we encourage you to wait until we get to that item. We will give you an opportunity to make your comments at that time. We also ask that your public comment relate to the agenda item currently before the board. Do we have WebEx right now? Just assume no.
Yes, we do. We can call for public comment.
Nice work. Thank you. So members of the public on WebEx, if you would like to make a comment, use the chat feature to send the host a note that you would like to offer public comment. If you are joining us on the phone and would like to make a public comment, press *3. We will take any WebEx comments first, followed by telephone comments. We will use the same system throughout the meeting for public comment during each agenda item. You will find instructions on how you can make public comments on the agenda for this meeting posted on our CSLB website. Members of the public using WebEx, the instructions I just provided mirror the instructions in the agenda for the appropriate method to make public comment at any time during this meeting that I or another board member calls for public comment. Conversations, comments, or questions in the WebEx chat feature that do not occur during the period in which public comment is requested will be answered by staff in the chat feature. Staff will research questions that cannot be addressed immediately and follow up with requesters as appropriate. So I'll now ask for comment. Board members in the room, do any board members have an item they would like placed on the future agenda? Seeing none, board members off-site, do any board members on the phone or WebEx have any item they would like placed on the future agenda? Okay, are there any comments from the public here in the room? All right, and Rico, can you please check to see if there are any members of the public who wish to address the board or offer a possible agenda item for a future meeting off-site?
This is Mike Janetsky. We do not have any public commenters in the WebEx chat.
Thank you, Mike. That concludes CSLB public comment. So back to you, Chair Martin.
Thank you. Our first order of business is a presentation by Chair Teichert regarding women in construction and a discussion concerning opportunities to recruit women into leadership roles. Chair Teichert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Martin. For those following along, we are on page 11 of your board packet, and I'm pleased to open this item with a presentation I have prepared for today's agenda item C1. CSLB Public Affairs staff, can you please cue up the slides? Thank you very much. So I've had the privilege today of addressing the concept of women in construction. What is the current state of affairs as far as California goes? And what are some of the opportunities that we have to grow this important part of our workforce? Growing the development of women in construction is something that's of great interest to all of us as both employers and colleagues who want the best folks in our workforce, recognizing that 50% of the population is women and significantly fewer than 50% of the construction workforce is women. So as you see from the current situation slide we have here, a quote I've often cited is from Warren Buffett, who noted that part of the reason for his success is that he only had to compete with half the population. There are a lot of intelligent, capable, competitive people who happen to be women, and we are missing out on them in our industry. So you see that nationally, women make up slightly less than 11% of the construction workforce when you look at all trades and crafts related to construction. The CSLB, as we discussed in our board meeting yesterday, has done a good job this year of starting to collect demographic information on our licensees. Historically, we didn't collect it, partly intentionally, to try to be demographically blind to the folks who are applying to contractors' licenses. So it was from a good place of motivation. However, the result is also that we don't actually have hard data on what are the demographics of our current licensed population. So this year we began that effort. And as you can see, we found that slightly fewer than 10% of the licensing CEOs, qualifiers, presidents who responded to our survey are women. So there's some in there, but there's, again, a handful and slightly less than the national average. The California Department of Industrial Relations has also been working hard to grow the apprenticeship participation of women. So about 4% of the apprentices in California are women. So as you see, there's a lot of opportunity to make this industry attractive and to educate and prepare women to be a part of it in such a fashion as to grow our workforce constructively. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so this talks a bit to the need. So as all of us know, there is a significant need in California as well as nationally. So I will go ahead and say for Nevada as well. There are huge opportunities in construction. There's a lot of work demanded both by the infrastructure needs that exist as well as the array of construction jobs that there are. So I've included several citations here of statistics that you can see how much need there is for women to be in here. It's a little bit small. Yeah. Part of it's because we have an aging workforce. And so as you see folks exiting the workforce, there's not as much of an opportunity to replace them unless we have enough folks that are qualified and capable and ready to go. So there's a lot of demand for qualified construction workers. The need for us to expand the population is pretty clear and present. Next slide. And the opportunity is that, as you can see, women actually have an excellent pay ratio relative to men in construction. So nationally speaking, the Bureau of Labor Statistics keeps track of what women and men are paid for doing the same jobs. Construction is one of the most equally paid jobs that there is, with women making close to what men make in this job, about 10 to 15% more than they make on the national average for doing the same work men do. So construction is an outstanding opportunity for women to have a good paying job with good contributions. My eyes aren't as good as I wish they were. We're looking at the front one. Yeah, cool. So that's the part. Is it like last? Yeah. Yeah. So one of the interesting factors, Gallup did a survey to look at what are the jobs of the future. And some of the things that constitute a job of the future means that it's in high demand and it also can't be automated. In the case of construction, it typically also can't be offshored. So construction is something that demands people be present and that they actually interact with the work environment. So the exciting thing about construction is that it's one of the high-ranking jobs of the future, which is something that I think a lot of our workforce and young people aren't always clear on. It's just the exciting possibilities of construction. It's not just a backup or a dead-end job. It's something that we're going to be needing forever. So I think in addition to the fact that young people don't always think of construction, we do have some opportunities to avoid automation and have the elimination of jobs in our line of work. And then finally, if you look at the self-employment ratio, construction workers are self-employed at a higher ratio than the general population. One of the reasons that women do go into business many times is to control their own environment, to be able to balance childcare and other demands, or to simply have the type of work environment that they wish to have. Construction has a higher proportion of self-employment than many other industries, which I think is another place that points to the opportunity for women as well as the demand for additional workforce. So next slide. So one of the challenges that we have here is the perception, both by folks that are currently in the industry as well as by women who may be considering coming into it, that there are stereotypes and predispositions that would make it less friendly for women. So the idea that women wouldn't be capable or wouldn't be interested is one of the things that we need to overcome. So workplace culture and harassment, there's some of these topics that we've addressed over the course of years in both of our states and in our nation with things like laws and regulations that prevent harassment of kinds that are prohibited. It's the next step that we really need to also include, which is to make it a friendlier environment and figure out how do we have this be a place where women feel that they're respected and held on equal footing. And that's one of the reasons that I'm excited for the chance to speak in this forum today, is to really encourage all of us who have a role, a leadership role, and a visible way to show up on job sites to continue moving the ball forward in terms of both saying women are welcome and also demonstrating that they're welcome by asking for their opinions and demonstrating that they're welcome in the workplace. Since there are so few of them, it's one of the things that they can easily be misinterpreted, that they're not welcome. And I think that's up to all of us to continue leading in that direction. As far as the physical demands go, there's some crafts certainly that are more physically demanding than others. And there's some of the tools that are, and there's also many women who are physically fit and ready for the work. So I think there's a lot of perceptions in the workforce that need to be overcome as well. So the call to action, first of all, is for all of us to continue to act as allies. And so an ally is someone who doesn't necessarily share the exact same challenges as the person they're trying to help, but actually is interested in being part of the solution. And so acting as an ally means coming alongside, understanding what somebody's challenges are, and attempting to move them forward. And that can include things like mentoring and sponsorship, understanding what somebody's issues are and teaching them more. Sponsorship is also finding ways in maybe off-site settings to advocate for women. So for instance, if there's an opportunity for leadership, if there's an opportunity for future development, having an opportunity to step out and identify that there's a woman who may be capable for that job is an excellent sponsorship move that can be done by allies. So there's a few different ways that folks who aren't necessarily in this demographic group can go ahead and help. And that's true actually for all of the underrepresented demographic groups. So I'll call that out specifically for folks in this room, because we all have positions where there's some sort of power we can use to benefit folks that we would like to benefit. And then providing networking opportunities and training opportunities is one of the things that's really exciting about being in a place like the Carpenters Training Center today. There's a lot of training that our industry offers. There's a lot of networking opportunities just by virtue of gathering, and having all of us continue to invite women into those settings to make sure that they're present and provided is also an action that all of us can take. So I think there's a lot that goes beyond the historical sort of human resources approach to not having women feel harassed, and all the way into actively advocating and moving the ball down the field for capable individuals who happen to be women who are great additions to our industry. So in next slide. One of the things that I'd like to call out is that in California, we have a grant program benefiting women in construction that's taking off. So there's an advisory committee that the Department of Industrial Relations has put together to get this ball rolling, including a grant program directly giving money to women to support their entrance and participation in the construction workforce. So we're putting our money where our mouth is, essentially, and finding ways to solve some of the problems that actually exist. One of the items, going back to my appreciation for the CSLB starting to collect demographic data, is that sometimes it can be easy to imagine problems when we haven't actually spoken with the affected population. And one thing that's exciting about the DIR program is that they are meeting women where they are and saying some of these grants are for childcare. They're looking at, can the childcare grants also be given to a family member? Since in many cases, women in the trades, that's who's taking care of their children. And if you have $5,000 or $10,000 and you can't give it to a family member, it's not very practical. So trying to make sure that we're actually stepping forward and addressing the underlying issues that sometimes prevent women from being in the trades is something that the DIR is engaged in, and that I would encourage all of us to continue keeping opportunities in mind for how are the ways that we can identify what the issues are and the barriers and put them to the side, both kind of physically and also in terms of financial and leadership support. So I'll pause for a moment and see if there's any questions or discussion on the topic.
Mary, can I ask you a question? Thank you. That's a very great presentation. So I'm just curious how you promote women in construction in the state of California, through seminars, to going to schools. How do you guys promote it?
It's a great question. We've done a few things. We had some excellent outreach from CSLB for Women in Construction Week. So there was both public information outreach on the website and some legislative recognition of this as a topic. So some of it is through our public information outreach and making sure that women feel welcome to that. We did, like board member Ruane and I led a series of panels, unfortunately during COVID, but we had a series of panels addressing women in construction, which were advertised both kind of in all the settings that we could think of, including small businesses, as well as licensed populations, as well as through many of our trade partners and labor unions, and reaching out to ask women to participate. And then we had this series of 4 panels addressing different topics that had to do with getting licensed, learning or finding ways to finance the work that they were going to do and so forth. So really it's a massive amount of outreach. And in that case, also making training specific to some of the topics we thought women were wrestling with available. collecting the information that we're now collecting is a step towards the next level of that, which is to say, in addition to the things that we had thought of, what are the other barriers that we haven't necessarily gotten into and addressed yet? We're also blessed in our industry and in our state with a lot of other agencies and associations that are focused on this topic. So we have a lot of trade associations. We have a lot of, well, for all the labor unions, which I appreciate, are all focused on this topic as well. And so we find that we have a good coalition of partners when we go out to try to find training and outreach opportunities. So I'd say the combination of making it publicly available and then offering specific training and guidance is kind of where we are so far. Obviously, there's a long way to go given the statistics, but we're starting somewhere. Thank you for the question. Any other questions or discussion?
Steve Pinelli? I don't know, I can't raise my hand on my computer. I don't know if can you hear me by chance?
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi. I commend you on what you're trying to do, and it's a very hard thing. As you all know, I'm on the board of directors with IAPMO, and I'm going to actually have them send you something. As of right now, we had a lady plumber that has fought to get where she's at, and they actually made a coloring book for her in the trades, and it's been sent out to union halls and schools, and it's being received. Everybody's taking it in and receiving it, and the kids love it, and it makes her look like a superhero because she's tried so hard. So I just reached out to them, and I'm asking them to send you some of the coloring books and tell you exactly what they're doing right now with the women in the trades. It's something that we've been dealing with over the past 5 to 6 years. It's very hard because people get told that they can't do it. We've done some outreach in different parts of the world. Matter of fact, we were just in Frankfurt, and they had a competition where 2 of the ladies that were there were just amazing, and we are trying to reach out to them as well to see if we can get more people into the trades and get them to speak for us to different demographics to try to bring them in. So it's something that's very hard to do, but like I said, IAPMO is reaching out, and they're trying to do their best to get more women into the trades, and I'll have them definitely reach out to you.
Thank you very much. I'd really appreciate that. I think the more resources, the better. And I definitely appreciate the modeling as well. I think one of the things that's challenging is when women don't see, or anyone, when people don't see somebody that looks like them in this group, it's hard to imagine that they belong there. And so those examples that you cited of having women be visibly present and accomplishing successful things in those lines of work, I think is another thing that goes a long way. So highlighting and calling out examples of modeling where women are doing well is also another benefit, I think, for everybody. So thank you for highlighting that.
Through the chair, this is Jim Ruane. May I say something?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, sure. Through my organization, Wall Ceiling Alliance in Northern California, we're sponsoring some times in October, working with the Northern California laborers and the carpenters to actually take buses from kids from high school to the trade facilities, the training facilities, and show the kids, both men and women, what the opportunities are going forward. A lot of them, as you know, I graduate high school, I got to go to college. They're stuck with a lot of debt, and we show them that if that's not for you, there's some real opportunities here in the construction industry where you can make a nice salary, you can have a nice pension plan, you can have health care, and it's just the exposure that a lot of these young people need, and we're working hard to do that. So I just thought I'd share that. It's a matter of outreach and a matter of effort that we're trying to put into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you're exactly right. Having them see what the opportunity is can be a game changer for some people, for sure.
Through the
Yes.
chair, you're right. Culturally, coming from the trades, we need to change culturally. So to get more women in leadership roles, we need more women in the trades in general. So us being at that 5% demographic is pretty close, but we are upticking higher. What board member Jim stated is correct. The trades are actively going into the high schools and letting everyone know the apprentice opportunities that exist with no student loan debt, livable wage, healthcare benefits, and actually females are starting to gravitate to this trades even more so because of those options theoretically, and to be able to get into leadership roles. I know specifically, even with us in the sheet metal workers, we have now women in our own organization on the union side in leadership roles. So you actually have women who are coming in to the trades and the ones who are recruiting into the trades, you're seeing someone who's there. So just like Mary yourself being a owner of a company, you're able to see someone who's in a leadership role. You need to see more leadership role on the union side as well, and we're doing that collectively. So when it comes down to it, there's so many studies that are out there, and when you talk about different groups, one recommendation for anyone who's available, every year there's a conference called Trade Women Build Nations, where there's over 3,000 women who are in the trade collectively get together, and the minority end up being the men. They are the 2% in that room when all the women who are in the construction industry. So you put yourself in someone else's shoes, and what you have to do is you have to be in their shoes to figure out what the issue is. And for us, we're trying to change the culture, and I will stay part that way. We can't get more people in leadership roles because you got to think of it. Some individuals, they just want to be a carpenter, a laborer, or sheet metal worker. They don't want to be in a leadership role. So if you're only at 4% and we're not at 20%, the pool of people who want to get into leadership roles actually diminishes as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Yep. I think you're right on as far as the outreach starts at the ground level, and people getting into it and preparing themselves for a leadership role requires them to get in at an entry level as well. So I appreciate all the outreach you're doing in high schools too.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to talk about the women in construction. So I have two daughters of my own, and the construction industry, it's an industry that's a very difficult industry, but it's not an impossible industry. I know with the UBC, the Carpenters Nationwide, we've invested a lot of our resources to making sure we educate our members about the females in our industry. In SoCal, we were highlighted many times because, the 6th Street Bridge, one of the most iconic bridges in Southern California and across the country, we actually had over 15 females working on that project, which is unheard of, right? But how does that start? It starts with the leadership. The leadership, taking the lead and showing that we're going to invest and not just talk about programs, but actually implementing and putting action. For us, we have invested in a Carson facility in Southern California where we have about maybe 30 females on a monthly basis going through a 2-week program, and we're connecting them with contractors, right? So giving them the biggest, the opportunity for them to go into becoming into a trade, or meeting with our contractors. And we have a lot of female-owned businesses in Southern California that they can see the opportunity. We also spend we have monthly meetings with them. Every month we meet with the sisters committees, and we assure that every one of our locals has an active. They're not large. I can tell you our largest one in Los Angeles has about maybe 15 to 20 females. The other ones are from 5 and below, and you see the stats that you shared. So I appreciate that you're bringing this up to light, because it is an important subject, and it starts with education. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, but we have some Neanderthal mentalities out there, right, that are still stuck in a certain way. So we do have to change that culture, and it starts by the leadership and educating the people out there. So appreciate you bringing this important subject.
Well, I really appreciate your comments as well. And I think it's interesting because the other place, I'm also like, my father only had daughters too. And so I think that's one of the ways that change happens, is people noticing right in their own homes that this is part of the capable, amazing people in the world are the daughters we have as well as the sons. And the other thing I'd say I appreciate really from everybody who's spoken today is that it's a partnership, really. It's not a women's issue. It's really all of us getting in this together and working on it. So even to your example of, the setting with where more women in the trades get together, but there were men that showed up too, that's a big deal. So even in the items that are focused on promoting women, all the men that show up and listen and find out what are the topics that we have to address and how do we solve this are so that is an essential piece of allyship, is showing up when the topic's women. It's not just a women's issue. So I think for all of us long term, it creates a really sustainable industry that all of us can kind of rely on for the future and for our kids. Any other questions or comments? Okay, any public questions or comments? I see one. Come on up. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be at this great meeting. My name is Leslie Mujica, Executive Director of IBW 357 in Southern Nevada, NECA, Labor Management Cooperation Committee, but I'm also on the State of Nevada Governor's Board for Workforce Development. And I really appreciate the women in construction, everything that you said today. One thing I'd like to bring up is that a priority would be childcare, because that is a major priority. And I know California is doing a lot with that, but we're making great strides here in the state of Nevada to address that issue. So because a lot of women stay home and some of them skip apprenticeship programs or leave the apprenticeship program because of childcare issues.
Are there any things in Nevada that you think are particularly noted we should think about?
Well, we have a couple of initiatives right now, and I'm sorry I don't have my paperwork with me, but I'd love to give you my card and share with you what we've been doing at the governor's board.
I would love to find out more. I think that's one of the beauties of having the joint board meetings like this, is that we get to all learn from each other's good ideas. So that would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comments or discussion? Anything online? Okay, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate that.
Sorry. One comment, Steve Pinelli. I would love to have any outreach that you would like with, again, with the IATMO board and with IATMO themselves. I sent an email as this was going on, and I got 5 responses from the CEO and CFO saying whatever you need from them, they would love to be a part of to help you and send you anything and all the information they have. And if we can promote anything with you, they would love to be a part of it. So
I would really appreciate that. I feel like
me know.
there's sort of a groundswell coming right now. A lot of people interested in it, and I feel like the more brains, the better.
Yeah, they've been promoting for the past 10 to 12 years or more, and they're really on it, and they just really want to be a part of something like that to help out. So if you want to go through me to reach out or whatever, I actually told them to get in contact with you directly so they can send you what they have. And if you want more, they can work with you and they can go from there.
Thank you very much. And maybe if you can send me their names or email addresses, I'm happy to reach out as well.
I definitely will. No problem.
Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Margie for Nevada's discussion of this item.
Thank you. Like you, Chair Teichert, Nevada is equally inspired to identify ways to encourage women to join the construction workforce in all roles of all kinds. Over recent years, our board has begun to take a more defined leadership role in connecting underserved and underprivileged groups of women with their professional counterparts across the construction industry. 2 of our main endeavors include our annual Hammers and Hope event, as well as workforce development programs and panels, which we'll be elaborating on in more detail later on in the agenda. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Teichert, for your leadership and example in this regard. Thank you, Ms. Green. Are there any additional comments from board members? Not, are there any additional comments from the public? Seeing none. Our next agenda item will be a discussion regarding the laws and processes related to applicant background checks and the requirements for licensure. At this time, I will turn it over to Nevada's former Director of Investigations, Paul Rosario, who is standing in today for Director Dave Behar. Following his presentation, I invite California to share their information on this item, and then we'll open the floor for up to comments from members.
Good morning. I think the slide's coming up now. Good morning. I will be presenting the NSCB applicant background requirement checks for licensure. Next slide, please. The statutory authority for a criminal background check comes from NRS 624265, Section 2, to which any principal member, owner, and qualifier on an application must submit fingerprints. Within the state of Nevada, fingerprints can be submitted through LiveScan or fingerprint cards. Submissions from outside the state must be via fingerprint cards. It should be noted that the NSCB does not maintain or utilize a list of crimes that, if convicted, are an automatic disqualifier for licensure. Next slide, please. This slide provides the data regarding application submissions. For example, in fiscal year 21-22, the board received 3,398 fingerprint submissions, of which 1,820 had no criminal histories and 1,307 had criminal histories, which is approximately 31%. This percentage compared to previous fiscal years has been trending higher, but I believe it is not a significant factor. Applicant with criminal history is an applicant whose fingerprint submission shows a criminal conviction, misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor, or felony. It is not based on if an applicant discloses to the board that he's been convicted of a crime. Next slide, please. During the recent 82nd Nevada legislative session, Assembly Bill 363 was proposed but failed. Proposed bill would have allowed licensing bodies to deny applicants only if they were convicted of a felony and released from custody within the past 3 years. Any conviction or subsequent release from custody beyond the 3 years could not have been taken into consideration for licensure denial. This legislation was concerning to the board as it would include individuals who may be required to be registered as a sexual offender, someone who have been required to register as a convicted felon, or someone who may have been convicted of several domestic violence crimes. As I stated, the legislation had failed. Next slide, please. Upon the submission of fingerprints to the Nevada State Police, any criminal history information is forwarded to the board. And upon review of the criminal records, a determination is made by the Director of Investigations if additional information is required to be submitted by the applicant, such as a statement related to the arrest and convictions, court record information, and/or police reports. A background investigation is then opened, and upon obtaining the information, the Director of Investigations will determine if the background investigation should be closed and the applicant recommended for approval, or if the applicant should be interviewed regarding his or her criminal history. Any applicant who potentially will be recommended for denial or of licensure will be interviewed. The interview is conducted by the Director of Investigations and the background investigator. The interview is not recorded, and it is not a sworn statement of the applicant. The applicant's statements related to his or her criminal history is documented in detail, and a recommendation for approval or denial is forwarded to the licensing department to consider in their determination for licensure. Approximately 5 years ago, the board initiated the background interview in the application process. It was started due to the large number of applicants who were appealing the denial of licensure, which was based on their criminal history. Prior to including background interviews in the process, investigative staff would review the criminal history based on the conviction, the court and police documents, and the statement of the applicant. A recommendation for denial or approval would then have been made by the Director of Investigations. The interview process allows for a clearer picture of the applicant's criminal history, and more importantly, provides transparency to the applicant as to the board's concerns regarding the applicant's specific convictions. The interview process has sped up the time it takes to process an application, and more importantly, reduced the number of applicant denial appeals before the board by approximately 80%. Though there is more work for investigations in the front end by conducting and documenting the interviews, the overall amount of time of staff and board members is greatly saved. On an additional note, investigation also performs, at the request of licensing, applicant experience interviews. And these interviews are conducted to ensure the accuracy of the experience claimed in the application by the applicant. Next slide, please. This slide shows the quarter comparison of fingerprints and applicant interviews. For the fourth quarter of this year, we received, which is up till June 8th of 2023, We received 891 fingerprint submittals, of which 647 were without criminal history and 239 had criminal history. Of the 239 with criminal history, 79 background investigations were open. So it's fair to say that the roughly 150 cases with criminal history that no background investigation was open, those were approved. Of the 79 background investigations were open, 11 applicants were interviewed. So even though now we got the 79 of the background investigations that were opened, only 11 applicants were interviewed, which means that approximately 68 were either approved or the applicants were rescinded by the applicant. Majority of those would have been approved by staff. So of the 11 applicants that were interviewed, staff recommended denial of 2 and approval of 9. And previous quarters, you can see it changes. It depends. It's more cyclical than anything. But if you look at the recommended for denial on the previous quarter 3 was 17 of this past fiscal year, 20 the previous quarter on quarter 2, 22 before that. But last year it was, again, the recommendation for denial was much less, 2, 6, 3, and 6. It just depends on the applicants and what they were submitting in each individual application. Of those interviewed, staff recommended denial for 2 and approval of 9. Though an applicant may have been denied licensure by staff, he or she could still appeal to the board at the licensure denial hearing. Of those applicants who were denied licensure based on their criminal history, and they do appeal to the board, which is roughly 50% of those that are denied by staff. If they appeal to the board roughly approves an estimated 50% of those. The next chart shows the total amount of fingerprints submitted over the past 2 years as 6,513. You can go to the next slide, please. I'm sorry. 6,513, and that approximately 72% had no criminal history and 28% with criminal history. Next slide, please. This slide shows that of the 1,801 with criminal history over the past 2 years, 27% of them had background investigations opened. That's 486. Of which 28% of those required an interview in the process. So we'll bring it down again. 136 were interviewed. Of those interviewed, 59% were recommended for denial, which is approximately 80, and 41% for approval, which was 55. Even though the director of investigations at times may be comfortable after an interview with approving an applicant with criminal history, he may recommend denial due to the significance of the conviction and the frequency of the convictions. For total transparency to the public, some cases should be determined by the board at the application denial hearing. Now, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding Nevada's process and the applications.
Are there any questions from board members for Mr. Rosario? Any questions from the public for Mr. Rosario? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll turn it over to, is there someone from California to speak on this agenda item?
Yes, this is Dave Foat. I'd like to just make a few comments. Thank Paul Rosario for a very informative presentation. So as I understand it, in Nevada, you are now fingerprinting, you do fingerprint all applicants, all personnel on a license when they make application. I just wanted to quickly provide a little background as to how fingerprinting came about in California and how it's working today. Prior to 2005, the Contractors Board in California did not fingerprint applicants. We had tried a number of times to get legislation through. We had industry opposition. But that was until somebody named Mark Lee Ross surfaced, and he was down in San Diego, Johnny Simpson's hometown. Mark Lee Ross is somebody that we had revoked. We had also filed criminal cases against. He did time in state prison. He was released. He made application. He falsely stated on his application that he had not been revoked. He had not had criminal convictions, and he used a false social security number or driver's license number. And so he obtained a license, and he quickly defrauded 70 or more consumers in San Diego. He received a tremendous amount of outreach. And so at that point, the industry and the legislature in California thought, well, it's time to start fingerprinting, because along with what Paul said, it also helps to identify or authenticate the personnel on the license. That's so important. So we estimate now, and I wasn't able to get the actual number, that more than 60% of our licensees, the personnel on our licenses, have been fingerprinted. And I know not all of you have the California book, the packet today, but we do have statistics in the book. We do not have a slideshow. And it's interesting if you look at the statistics, because calendar year 2022, we received 37,895 DOJ records. And so that's quite a bit. You know, that's based on our application population. And we only denied 13. That's less than 1%. Back, if you look at 2018, we had 65 denials. So the denials keep going and becoming less. And if you go to the Contractors Board of California website, you'll see that we want to encourage people to apply. You know, we don't have disqualifying criteria, but I will say that the disqualifying criteria is generally going to be any type of financial related felony. If you've been convicted of that and it's within 7 years, possibly get denied. We also look at sex related crimes and, you know, just any type of violent felonies that, again, would be within 7 years. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And perhaps most importantly, though, it would appear in looking at our data that applicants may not be as apt to apply if they have one of those type of convictions within that time frame. And so that may be why we're not denying as many as we have in the past. But where I see it being real effective is with our licensed population. I know that Paul mentioned how he's notified by, I think, local law enforcement. I wasn't quite sure on that, but he's notified of somebody that's arrested and perhaps convicted. We have the same setup. And so we have somebody that has obtained a license, and without this fingerprinting program, it would be very unlikely that we would know if somebody had been convicted of a felony that we licensed. So this is a strong consumer protection tool where consumers, you know, they're able to understand that if we become aware of somebody that is licensed, has been convicted of grand theft, has been convicted of a felony crime, that we're going to take action on that. So I did go back and look at our records for the last 10 years. I asked, the question was, how often do we take action based on, and they call it the wrap back feature from the Department of Justice in California, where somebody's been fingerprinted, now they've been convicted, we become aware of it. How often do we take action on that information? And it was very interesting. It's approximately 200 times a year. And so within the last 10 years, we had, I think it was 784, we call accusations that are to revoke the license filed based on that wrap back feature. And one of my duties with my position is to review the decisions or the outcome of these administrative actions. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, we do have some fairly serious situations where a licensed contractor will engage in a type of violent crime or be convicted of a sex-related crime. This is happening, and we take action very quickly in California. And we're so fortunate to have this wrap back feature and to have the fingerprinting program to protect consumers, but also to protect the professionalism of the licensed population, so that the licensed contractors know that we're keeping the industry clean. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I do believe it's working very, very well in California. There has been a recent law that says that if you were arrested and not convicted, you can't hold that against someone, which our board here agreed with. So that made sense. If it was expunged, then that can't be held against someone. And then the third one is if it's a crime over 7 years old. So then you have to take a hard look at that. And for the most part, if you've been convicted, it's been more than 7 years, you wouldn't be denied a license or have action taken for it necessarily, unless it was one of the prior reasons that I discussed. And that was something that we worked out in the legislature, that You know, if it's a violent crime, sex-related felony, or it's a financial crime, that's something we're very observant of. Contractors or anyone that would apply for a license that's caused somebody financial harm that remains outstanding, that would be grounds for denial. That would be grounds for license revocation.
Thank you, Registrar Vogt. Are there any questions? Board members?
Chairman, I just wanted to note on pages 26 and 27, kind of the guidelines that we use. And I know that we sometimes are very subjective when people come before us and we look at the criminal history. Our enforcement officer, like Mr. Rosario, as he stated earlier, they do a great job of going. Sometimes I don't even know how they get information to go back so far. And so you see a pattern. And so we try to determine based on the severity of the type of crime that the person was engaged in. And I'm the public member, so I really take to heart anything that has to do with pedophilia or sexual related crimes or any kind of domestic violence, because my primary concern, I know it's everybody's concern, but is protecting the public. So we have to be very subjective at times. I'm just wondering with you folks, like there's nothing specific that we have in our requirements regarding the crime. So we have to kind of make these decisions based some on our gut feeling and some on the interview and some on the actual individual sitting before us, so we can look them in the eye to determine whether or not this person is somebody that we're going to give a license to, because we take it very seriously. And our biggest concern is that if we ever do license somebody and then later on that individual goes out and does something inappropriate or some crime, that again, that reflects very strongly against the board. So I'm just curious how the same direction as us, is that similar what you guys do too?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are looking at, if we're looking at a situation where somebody's been convicted, they're still on probation or parole, but generally you're generally going to be denied for that. And that is a case that we would certainly take action. We also, I think similar to Nevada, have a requirement that a licensed contractor is supposed to let us know if they've been convicted. They don't always do that. But if we find that they have been convicted of that crime, we will take some type of action. Well, we try to be reasonable and understand that mistakes happen. We want to work with our contractors. And if it's something relatively less serious, like a misdemeanor, and I mentioned that more than 2,000 legal actions that we took in the last 10 years, so over 700 were accusations. The rest were citations, and those are administrative citations. And that can happen if, just say you had a second DUI, something like that, you may wind up with a citation. So it's just about trying to explain to somebody, we need to do a better job in the future, but always looking at our main priority, and that is protecting consumers and having them be aware of what's happening. And if you are convicted of a crime in California, we do take action for it. That's public record.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Chair Teichert, would you like to ask for any public comment on this?
Any public comment on this topic in the room or online?
Nothing on the chat online.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Our next item is concerning the comparison of worker compensation requirements between our states, and I will turn the time over to Registrar Vogt to lead this discussion.
Yes, so workers' comp has been quite a challenge in California. So we've required it. I was looking at what's in the packet since 1911. We've been required to have workers' compensation insurance, but unfortunately, it's kind of a risk-reward situation. Often, workers' compensation insurance is expensive. We tend to look and say, well, what's the advantage of being an unlicensed contractor? It's a huge disadvantage, in my opinion, to be not having a license, because California, you can't collect. You're going to benefit greatly by having a license, and the cost to have a license in our states probably around $30 or a little bit more a month. So not real great, but not paying your workers' comp premiums quite significant. You can save a lot of money in doing that, and it makes it very difficult for the law-abiding contractors to compete. And also in California, if an employee is injured, they have an uninsured benefit employer's trust fund that employee can go to that other business owners that are paying their fair share into workers' comp have to fund. So again, that's not fair. Plus, there's been a study done that fund itself can be hard for an employee to obtain resources from. So the goal is we need our contractors that have workers to have workers' comp. Now, we provided an exemption for many years, and they could, contractors could say, well, I don't have any workers. I'll certify I don't have any employees. We looked into roofers and some other trades, went out to their properties and found, well, this roofing contractor says that there's no employees, yet they have 12 trucks. So who's driving all these trucks? Doesn't make any sense. We do proactive enforcement. We verify the employees. So the roofers, especially at issues in California where they pay, roofers and tree workers tend to pay about the highest workers' comp premium. So they were able to get legislation chaptered where the C39 roofing classification in California is required to have a workers' comp policy. They believe that's been very successful in helping to level the playing field. Now, where we are today is there's been some frustration with the construction industry in California. We spent a lot of resources trying to move the needle, get more contractors with workers' comp, but we still are at about 50 to 55%. We estimate we have somewhere around 120,000 licensed contractors that have an exemption on file still. What went into effect this year is the California board sponsored legislation to require 4 additional classifications to have workers' comp, or we remove the classification. So I can tell you that those 4 classifications, concrete, we looked at concrete, and it's kind of interesting. Most part, you don't pour concrete yourself. I tried it once. You got to get a jackhammer later. So it's not a good idea to do it. So in HVAC, we know those heating and air contractors generally have workers. Asbestos in California, you already had to have workers' compensation. And then for tree service, that's the other one. So what's happening at the end of this month, and as we're meeting today, is we're removing classifications from those licenses if they haven't obtained a workers' comp policy. So we've achieved some success in getting policies on file. I did look at the HVAC class to see what's happened with their renewals. I should back up. As of January of this year, we stopped renewing these classifications if they did not have a policy. So for HVAC alone, the only one I have stats for, there was a little over 400 that didn't renew. So we kind of expected that some wouldn't renew, but we hope they will. And we're going to run a report on, I understand, July 10th to determine where we're at with obtaining these policies. So there may be a little bit of a compliance curve. We expect that, but overall, I think that could be helpful. And I just will close by saying the tools in California to enforce workers' comp are quite significant. We have a California Department of Insurance that has a $40 million grant program. So you can get that grant program pays for the prosecution of workers' comp violations, pays the DAs, district attorneys in California to prosecute those crimes. So you generally get a case filed by a DA in the county that's funded by that. We now have the ability to cite administratively up to $30,000. That's something that's fairly new. And the last thing we have is we can suspend a license. So if a consumer files a complaint and they tell us there was workers on site, and the contractor will admit it, I won't give away some of our strategy getting them to admit it, but if they'll admit it, we can suspend the license. But even with all those tools, we still have about half our licensed contractors with an exemption on file. So hopefully this mandatory workers' comp requirement will achieve compliance. But that's kind of the update that I have. Michael, Mark, I know from the industry standpoint, maybe do you want to share any thoughts as to how important it is that we do enforce workers' comp requirements?
Yeah, thank you, David. I did have a script here, but I think David hit on most of the great points in the script. So I'm going to move to a couple items. So back to what David said, starting on page 31 is of the CSLB California side packet. There are some items here. One thing that he did mention is on the roofers workers' comp industry. I think one thing within the roofers, once we started mandating that, there was a drop off, but then in the end, now it's upticking back to the normal levels once that law actually started. So we're hoping C20 is going to be the same way. There's going to be some drop offs originally, but then eventually in a couple of years, people are going to need to know we needed that license to do business. They're going to come back. I think also consistently with workers' compensation enforcement efforts, between 50 and 55% of California's 120,000 plus active licensed contractors claim to have no employees. So this particular law is really going to help that efforts when there's certain jobs out there where you need to have 10 workers and they're saying they have no employees, there's something off there. So partly with us and CSLB, we are publicly making sure the public is aware. And what will end up happening is, let's say a contractor comes to the house, someone actually gets hurt on the job, they don't have any workers' comp insurance, then they're going to go after the homeowner, and that's not good for the public. One thing too, that there's some board sponsored legislation that's coming forward is the increase of the penalty for civil penalties from $8,000 to $30,000. That's actually going to help, and hopefully that actually gets sponsored and gets done. And we talked about that at yesterday's meeting, but that's going to be a big determination. You know, there's two options. You have the carrot and the stick, and as CSLB, we have to do a little bit of both. Carrot and the stick is obviously the penalties that's associated with enforcement. Another problem in the construction industry is contractors' misclassification of workers or failure to report wages. However, these issues are not within CSLB's jurisdiction, but as David has spoke before in the past, we are a partner in other agencies, one of many, including a different task force with DIR, Cal OSHA, a Department of Insurance, where they're actively going and making sure that legitimate contractors or contractors that aren't being legitimate are actually providing that information to them and making sure they get licensed and actually make sure that there's nothing actually happening going forward.